everyone. Welcome back to the Rumcast. We are the podcast that talks all things rum related with the people who love and shape it. We're incredibly excited today to be sharing with you our feature interview with Mr. Larry Warren, the proprietor of St. Nicholas Abbey Rum in Barbados, and really getting in depth with some of the fascinating differences between his operation and the other Barbados distilleries that we've covered previously here. But before we get into that, my name is John Gulla, and I'm joined in hosting this here podcast, as always, by the one and only Mr. Will Hookinga. Will, how's it going?
I'm good, John. I understand we have an interesting question that came in that we're gonna jump into before we get to the interview with Larry, which I'm very excited to share with everyone.
Yeah.
St. Nicholas Abbey being one of those producers that it's kind of hard to get a feeling for it unless you go there, which we talk about as it's really more of a feature than a bug. But yeah, so I'm really excited to get into that later. But before we get into that, what's this listener question that came in?
Well, we had this really interesting one. We had Alex Gould, a longtime listener. He reached out to us on Instagram, and he's about to partake on a milestone of some importance. Will, he's getting married in October.
All right. Well, congrats, Alex.
Yeah, congrats,
and also,
Alex.
Excellent choice of October for getting married. My wife's anniversary is actually October 20th, which I believe is just about the perfect time of year as far as weather is concerned in most parts of the country. So kudos, congratulations, Alex. And,
still hot down here, but that's
yeah,
it's all year round for us.
I'm talking about the normal parts of the United States. John.
Oh, gotcha. Not the outliers like way down here in South Florida.
Exactly.
Anyway, so Alex wants to do a cool idea. He wants to do a rum sipping bar specifically at his wedding for himself and his guests. Yeah, and he's interested to get our opinion on what the bar might have at it that would appease and impress, some of the rum enthusiasts maybe that'll have like himself, but really also people who are less familiar with sipping rums or even some outright novices that might be there.
So kind of a diverse crowd. Some people are going to be into rum, but I would presume that the majority of people are just going to be everyday social drinker types.
Yeah.
Who, there's probably some people who are adventurous. You're at a wedding, it's fun. You want to get into it and maybe try some stuff for the first time, even if you're not really someone who drinks spirits neat all that much.
Right, exactly. So this isn't a rum fest, right?
Right.
Where you're going to be looking for those type of things. But at the same time, I do think as a rum fan himself, we have to figure out some things that we think might work for him and for everybody else. There was a couple other stipulations he mentioned, so I want to make sure to get those. He mentions it should be roughly 6 bottles, give or take 1 or 2 max. So we're looking between 4 and 8 bottles here that we would think would make this successful. And it's also worth noting, he said he's going to have a separate bar for mixed drinks, including rum and other spirits. So there's going to be that already there. So we're not worried about cocktails or mixed drinks or things like that. We're really going for the rum sippers. And I don't think he's trying to blow people's minds, like we were saying, with anything, but get some good stuff. So with that in mind, what are going to be some of your thoughts for Alex?
So I have a few guidelines that come to mind. First of all, I think the first thing, and this runs counter to kind of how I enjoy rum, but I would say a good maxim to follow would be avoiding cask strength or high ABV spirits, not only because you want this to be approachable, but also just because you also want to avoid drunk people barfing all over your wedding, right? So, and
that's a good one. I hadn't thought of that.
I'm not trying to cast aspersions on, the crowd that's going to be on this wedding. I don't know what kind of crowd it's going to be, but I just know when people are looking to celebrate, party, have a good time, some people are looking for the path of least resistance to becoming inebriated, right? And so if you've got a great, let's say you have like Foursquare 2009 there or something, a great cask strength rum, you might run into some people getting that and just, shooting it back, as I said, just trying to take that path of least resistance to getting absolutely hammered.
In a social environment, right? So now you have to be like, yeah, I can do this.
Exactly.
No problem.
So I'm trying to avoid some of those scenarios. I would stick to stuff that's 50% ABV or less probably here. And I also think you want to take kind of a diverse approach to the selection. So I think you want to pick countries that are sort of foundational rum producing countries, ones that you kind of send people to first. So obviously you're going to want a Jamaica, a Barbados, maybe something from Guyana, maybe something from Martinique. I'm wanting to get a good mix, a good representation, and then also maybe throw in something fun that's quality and maybe unexpected, like St. Lucia or a blend or something like that. So the rums that are kind of in this wheelhouse that are coming to mind for me, I'm thinking the obvious Appleton recommendations, anything on the 8 to 15 scale. I'd probably do like the 12 or the 15 just because I feel like those have a little bit more mass appeal than the 8 does.
Yeah.
Maybe a Worthy Park Estate Reserve. I'm thinking about, you're going to want something from Mount Gay or Foursquare probably to represent Barbados for you. And, unless you can get your hands on some St. Nicholas Abbey, we'll talk more about why you probably can't in time for your wedding later. But maybe something, an El Dorado 12 or 15 to represent the Guyana. Yeah. And like I was saying, something from St. Lucia would be cool. Maybe Chairman's Reserve Legacy. That's kind of one of my favorite go-tos for representing that island that isn't super high strength. Maybe a Bourbon Court 8-year. Maybe a blend that came to mind was Denizens Merchants Reserve, which I think is fun and affordable, lots of character. I know it has some Martinique rum in it, but also that Jamaica component really kind of brings the flavor, but is approachable, I think. So those are kind of the first things that came to mind for me. What about you?
I had a similar thought that you did in terms of the diversity of trying to get all the different kind of major rum pedigrees in there and establishing that wide base for people to see, wow, how diverse rum can be.
Right.
And I also fully agree with you that we're trying to stay away from anything that's going to melt your face off here or be an outlier, that the ABV should be really in that 50 or less. I'm thinking things like Foursquare ECS, but the red label ones, the ones that are in that 46, 48, Detente, Indelible. I think those are fantastic representations, and the cask finishes there might be interesting for some people that may not have thought of that before. With Jamaica, I think your Appleton one is the right way to go. I think a Worthy Park Single Estate would also really be cool. I also want to include a couple, though, that I think we don't want to overlook for this crowd. So a couple that I'm thinking of are something like Brugal 1888.
Okay.
Now, I know there's some people out there who think there might be a little bit of added sugar, and there may be. It's really unclear, but I can tell you there is, it isn't much. It's still a fairly dry rum, but getting that Dominican kind of Spanish influence there, it's what a lot of people's conception of rum is to begin with, and so not breaking that conception completely to start with might be a good thing to do. And then, like you said, some other things, Guyana or Admiral Rodney St. Lucia.
That's a good one, yeah.
That would be it's the 40 or 43% ABV range there, and a really, nice bottle. I think people really enjoy it. It's a really well-refined rum. And hey, how about maybe something like a Privateer? An American rum that you can throw in there. Yeah.
I like the idea of having sort of an unexpected category, because that's another thing that is kind of quintessential to rum, is being like, wow, rum is made there. Everyone kind of has that reaction at some point. And so, something like that could be cool. Or even, going all the way to Fiji or something like that might be nice. Something outside the Caribbean to really open people's eyes up to what's out there.
Yeah.
And that's a good note on the sort of, light-bodied column still style rum. A few others that would fit in there where you slotted in the Brugal would be Panama. So something from Grander. I know that's a very approachable rum for a lot of newer people to the category, or Don Q as well. Puerto Rico
Don
being
Q
a
would
familiar,
be fantastic.
A familiar rum location. So I think those, and also both of those, are going to have no additives confirmed. So that's another plus. Another one that I want to throw in is a lot of the TCRL releases, I think are great.
One. Yeah.
And they're generally, you can get a lot of them in that sort of $50 to $60 price point. So maybe like the Australia, for example, that could fit into that unexpected slot as well.
Right.
And by the way, on the note of TCRL, we do a quick plug. We did a bonus episode for patrons just last week, kind of breaking down all of the new Transcontinental Rum line releases.
Of which there were many, right? Yeah.
Yeah, there are a ton.
Yeah.
There's sort of the new core range, seeing some repeat familiar faces there, but some new stuff as well. And then all of the single barrels and everything that's hitting the market soon. We also shared a little news about something special from the Vellier family that should be coming to the US around the holidays.
Ooh.
So if you want to check that out, go to patreon.com/therumcast. That's patreon.com/therumcast. And you can get that bonus episode and all the other ones we're doing. So all that aside, sorry to interrupt our response to Alex's question with a shameless plug, but I had to get it in there because it was appropriate. But yeah, all that said, I think those are good recommendations. And one more kind of thing I was trying to keep in mind was, like, I really did want to find a way to get an unaged agricole or something like that in there.
Yeah.
You
stole it from me, yeah.
My only hesitancy is, and I think agricole would be good for this, but there are some rums that we love very much, rums that are particularly funky or pungent. We love them.
Yeah.
We talk about them all the time. Those rums, for some people, the smell can be a little bit room clearing. You know what I'm saying? Like, you open a bottle of rum fire and some people look at you like, get that away from me.
Yeah.
And so I'm just trying to keep in mind avoiding something that's going to be the type of thing that the aroma fills the room. But I do think, like a Nissan Blanc or something like that could be very nice.
That, or a St. James, if you can find it, maybe even the Perret Labatt 40.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, I think those are our recommendations. And I'm honestly jealous that I got married all the way back in 2012 and I wasn't really into rum yet at that point in my life. So the idea to have a rum bar at my wedding didn't even occur to me. And
same
I
here.
wish I could do that. That would be fantastic.
So it's funny because I approached it the same way of saying, if this were my wedding, how would I do this and what would I want to do? And so the last question I had for you before we kind of move on here is, like, how easy or hard was this for you? I started out with this being like, oh, super easy, got this, boom. And then the more I sat on it for 2 days, I was just like, my mind was like, oh, but I have to include this, and oh, what about this, and oh, how about this? Did you do the same thing, or?
It's definitely like it's there's always more options you think of than you have room for, and there's always stuff that it feels bad to leave out, but
cut off. Yeah,
I do. It wasn't that difficult just because I just. Like, we talk a lot about, flighting rums to introduce someone for the first time. And this to me feels similar to that, with a few other kind of qualifiers added around it for the wedding context. But yeah, it was definitely fun. Enjoyed doing it. And congratulations to
congrats, Alex.
And your fiance. Hope the wedding is awesome. But John, with all that said, we do have a great interview with Larry Warren, as we said, the owner of St. Nicholas Abbey in Barbados, the only distillery in Barbados from which we had not interviewed someone yet. So we kind of completed that.
Hit the cycle, Will.
Yeah,
yes.
we checked all the boxes, although pretty soon we will not be able to say that anymore because there are two new rum distilleries coming to Barbados, I think expected to be within the next 12 months. We actually talk about that a little bit with Larry because he... St. Nicholas Abbey for a while now has been like the quote unquote new Barbados distillery, even though, he acquired the property in 2006 and started working on the distillery then. So it's been around for a while, but, still relatively new speaking. And we got into, all aspects of it. Obviously they're growing sugarcane there. They produce their rum from sugarcane syrup rather than cane juice or molasses, which is a unique thing about them on Barbados, and we talked a lot about that. We got to hear some really fun stories about just his process of developing, their approach to rum making and getting advice from Richard Seale and stuff like that. So really cool stuff. I'm excited for people to hear this one.
Yeah, it was a fun conversation. Like you kind of alluded to earlier, is that this one for me had the most mystery of any of the Barbados distilleries to it because of its small scale, because of its kind of very Barbados-centric. I mean, it's only really sold there and in a few places in Europe.
I think he said 96% of what they make is sold there.
Yeah. I thought it was more available in Europe, but as he was telling us, like you said, it's there, but it's a little less so than I anticipated. So it's very, it just had a lot to kind of figure out, I guess, if you will. And so Larry did a great job of walking us through a bunch of that. And I feel like it's a really something that's going to shed a lot of light for people who, as you mentioned, they can't go to Barbados. We're going to bring St. Nicholas Abbey to them a little.
Exactly.
So, with that, let's get on to it.
We are here with Larry Warren, the owner of St. Nicholas Abbey in Barbados. And Larry, I wanted to tell you, when I've talked to a handful of rum enthusiasts who have just gotten back from Barbados recently, over the past few months, a handful of people I knew went down there. And when I asked them how it was, it's almost unanimous that they not only mention St. Nicholas Abbey, but a lot of times they start with talking about that as one of the first highlights of the trip. And since John and I don't have any trips to Barbados on the calendar right now, unfortunately, we thought instead of waiting any longer, it would just be good to go ahead and have you on the show to bring St. Nicholas Abbey to us. So we're really excited to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Well, no, thank you very much for putting together this sort of forum for rum enthusiasts. You know, it's very much needed, you know, as a means of getting out authentic rum producers and letting them explain what really is the important aspects of good quality rum, you know, and how it's made. So this is this sort of forum for sure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, is it still accurate to describe you as the newest rum distillery in Barbados? Because I read recently about a couple more. We were just talking before we started recording that there are at least a couple more distilleries expected to open soon. And I wasn't sure how much longer that will be accurate. So, you know, I wanted to ask, how does it feel to no longer be the newest kid on the block now? It's almost like you're a veteran at this point.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. And you know what's the fun thing about being the smallest distillery? I always say that we make as much alcohol as the other distillers still in one day. You know?
That's great.
But you know, it's fun to be in the industry and not be competing. You know, you be in your own little niche market. And as we get into the discussion this evening, I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean about that.
Yeah.
But you know, I think this whole idea of more distillers coming to the island is an inclusive thing that we want to welcome, and it becomes a club where we together jointly agree that quality of a premium product is really the direction to go. You know, in terms of Barbados, I think. Unfortunately, you know, the environmental concerns that exist now with distilleries is still a while particularly before the Wills distillery gets going. I suspect they still have at least another year or maybe 9 months of environmental studies and all of that, you know.
So it's a pretty stringent process with checking all the boxes for the government and everything.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's good to hear. I know in that type of island environment, that is even more of a factor. I feel like, I mean, the environment's important everywhere, but I would assume just the degree to which a distillery can impact the surroundings in a setting like Barbados is significantly higher than a lot of other places.
Yeah, and because we haven't had a lot of distilleries come through, you know, we had the old distillers that were here for 40, 50 years and 100 years. You know, along came St. Nicholas Abbey, and no distillery had been set up in the island for 40 years, 50 years. And prior to Foursquare, it would have been hundreds of years.
Yeah. I was going to say they must have been the last one before you.
Yeah. So they're becoming more and more stringent in how they approach distilleries. But I'm happy. I'm very happy with the idea of working with people now, because there's a lot more direction now towards using sugarcane syrup in distilling. Even Foursquares 5 years ago, when I was talking about it with them, they were very skeptical, and then they have embraced it now a lot more.
That's very interesting. Yeah, we want to talk a little bit about using syrup later, because I know it's certainly not as common. I know of one producer here in the U.S. who's doing it, and maybe a few in Latin America, but it's certainly not seen quite as much as molasses or cane juice. But before we get into all that, I do want to back up a little bit to 2006 when you acquired the Abbey. I believe I read that your background was in architecture before that. So it seems like a suitable place. I know it has unique architecture and stuff, but I really just wanted to hear, what was it that drew you not only to purchase St. Nicholas Abbey, but also want to restore it as a working farm and start the distillery and everything else? Because it's not like, my understanding is there wasn't a distillery you were acquiring at the time. You were going to have to build the distillery.
Yes, correct. Well, of course, all plantations in the West Indies would have made rum, in various quantities. Mount Gay has been able to document it very clearly, but it's clear that all plantations would have made rum. So you have that heritage right there on provenance. But the reason I really went into rum producing is just through St. Nicholas Abbey. It is really an iconic. It used to be years ago called, the seventh wonder of Barbados. It was just it was just such a wonderful Jacobean mansion. It's sitting in 400 acres. It has everything going for it. It's in the highland part of Barbados. The electricity that comes to the plantation only comes to the plantation, goes nowhere else.
Wow. And
the actual plantation yard sits in the center of the 400 acres, so it's not like off to one side. When I first realized that it was going to eventually change hands, because it had been within the Cade family for about 150 years, it was way beyond my price range. But just as things were happening over an 18-month period, no one was interested in it.
Wow.
It's just amazing. And this
was surprising.
And this was prior to the 2008 collapse, everybody was spending money like crazy,
Right.
But nothing ever happened. And when they eventually decided to bring it to a price that was more reasonable, then our family definitely saw it as an opportunity. As a young architect, I worked for Marriott Hotels, and they had Samro's Castle. And I saw what the commercialization of a heritage home what can happen to it.
Right.
Over a period of 10, 15 years, it was slowly degraded to the point that it had lost all of its authenticity. St. Nicholas was something that I was very worried about. So once we agreed that we were going to buy it, we then had to find some way of sustaining it. Because if not, along would come something happened to me or my family, and then it would just become another condominium golf course,
Right.
So we took a decision to build a business model that was revolving around sugar, and rum is part of that history. And what we do is we have an ethos where we combine manufacturing in all respects, whether it's sugar, rum, or whatever, with tourism, because then that gives a much more meaningful experience to the visitor. And this is something that we really embrace right through up until today. It's 15 years now, and we really see this hands-on experience for the visitor as being a very important ingredient in combining tourism with manufacturing and rum production.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you're kind of saying like, hey, you're not just going to purchase this place just because it's there and not have it do anything, right? You're saying if we're going to do this and we're going to save it, that what is the operational plan kind of behind that to keep it going and keep it in good shape? It's That's a fascinating idea. Yeah. A lot of times you just buy property to buy property, but you have the vision to say it's not just about the property, it's about its function.
Yeah, because then it becomes a living entity that continues on forever.
Yeah.
You set the foundations here and the various aspects of the revenue that comes in, and then that becomes something that other generations can build on, and I think that's important.
It's pretty astonishing to think about. To me, it sounds like such a daunting proposition to acquire this property, and then it's almost, from my perspective, like you're starting three businesses. It's like you're starting a tourism business, you're starting agriculture by investing in all the sugarcane, and then you're starting a distillery on top of that. And I talk to people who start distilleries all the time, and that sounds like enough of a responsibility a lot of the time. So the fact that you're here 15 years later and doing well is really impressive.
Well, that's a very interesting comment and very accurate, because I realized early on, like 3 o'clock in the morning when I woke up and realized what I had done, that if I was going to be successful, I needed to not look too far down the road, because if I did look too far down the road, it would all fall apart, So I just looked at what the next logical step would be. So we restored it. We spent too much money, because as architects do, especially for their own. But I'm grateful we spent that money, because we did it right the first time. And then, of course, we had to, as you mentioned, John, that you needed now to have a business model that would sustain it. And one thing I've learned with the rum production and building brands, it's an extremely slow burn. It's nothing you can rush. And, we have come into this new. It's not like Richard or Mount Gay have a history in rum production or spirits. So we have to build this very slowly.
Yeah.
And that's another aspect of it, But I knew in the early days that I couldn't just be the purchaser of rum and reselling it. I had to actually be making it.
Yeah.
So that was just another step in the whole journey,
Yeah. And I guess along those lines, so you're in this interesting position of starting a distillery in a place that's made rum for a very long time.
Yes.
So then it's taking those, to your point about taking the next step, I guess, how did you take that next step and think about balancing all of the things in Barbados, the heritage, the traditions of rum making, and the expectations, with creating something new and different, perhaps?
Yeah, well, it's as I said, it's a journey that happens progressively as you're getting into it. You realize certain aspects of what is the next step to take. I think I, in the beginning, understood that if we are going to be successful, we must, and this is something I'll stress later on, we must be very true to our word, what we're doing and how we're telling the story. And because our rum is more than just rum in a bottle, it's also about the experience here at St. Nicholas and having the history of it, and knowing that we are committed to maintaining this legacy and building it. And it's amazing how people jump on board with that, and they get involved in it as part of their purchases and so on. But, the distillery was never intended to be a big distillery. And we also have tried to make it as hands-on as possible. So we have a minimum amount of mechanization in our bottling, in our production. And this is all part of this story that we tell. And visitors come and they see us with, 200 bottles on this big table. And we're bottling them, packaging them, wrapping them individually and engraving.
On the rum side of things, I know you've had a relationship with Foursquare Distillery from the beginning. Many of your products to date were distilled there while you ramped up production of your own rum, which we're going to talk about in a bit. But it's also my understanding from reading that Richard Seale assisted you in kind of developing your rums and production processes. So I wanted to know, how did that relationship with Richard come about, and how has he kind of influenced the development of the distillery?
Well, I think the one thing you must say about Richard Seale, and this is absolutely fundamental in his whole psyche and but being in rum, he has a tremendous passion for making rum good rum, and
Mhm.
Sure.
you know, he doesn't he doesn't make any qualms about saying that rums that have sugar in it or this or that are inferior. You know,
Mhm.
Yeah, he
at
lets
least
his voice be heard, right? Yeah.
yeah. I remember, I remember, I wasn't there, but I remember he used to go around to one of, I won't say which rum fest it was, with a density meter in his hand,
Right.
and he'd be testing the rums and said, "Oh, this has sugar in it." I think they disinvited him to the next one.
Not on the list.
No, but Richard, through a family member that worked with him, I needed a rum to sell.
Yeah.
In those early days, I knew nothing about rum other than drinking it growing up. And Richard, you know, he had a 1998 rum, which was, you know, just about 7 years old then, 7, 8 year old. And he had shown it to me. And honestly, I never really thought it was great. You know, it was a bit woody for me because I was more accustomed to drinking sweeter rums.
Uh-huh.
But then I started to realize that this is only the first steps in the maturation and the growth of the flavor profile of the rum. So once I had made the decision to go into the distillery, it was only natural that I would go to Richard and ask him for, you know, his advice. And he gave me good advice. He didn't get too detailed with his advice.
Mm-hmm.
But what he said, you know, first of all, is get the best spirit possible and put it in a barrel. And that's your first responsibility, is get the alcohol, the rum to the very best quality it can be. And then we realized that with such a small batch still that we had, if we are going to have to constantly change our recipe because of the quality and variations in molasses,
Right.
we will be forever
Chasing your tail, trying to,
exactly trying to get something consistent.
Yeah.
And then that's when we because we had a mill, you know, the plantation had a steam mill and it was working. Well, we refurbished it. So it was a matter of then agreeing how we were going to go about it. And syrup was the natural. We started initially with sugarcane juice, but it is very volatile and you have to get everything just right,
Right.
get it all ready to go. Whereas syrup gives you a lot of opportunities.
Shelf life.
Yeah. And there's a natural pasteurization that occurs when you're making syrup that kills off any wild yeast or, more importantly, bacteria.
Mm-hmm.
So you can now control it very much better usage syrup. So the notion of not using molasses and converting to syrup was done really because we were just so small, you know. But it was a right decision because then that allowed us to integrate everything with the tourism aspect of it. You know, the visitor comes and experiences it from the field, basically, to the bottle. And his advice then became slightly more giving me guidelines, but he didn't get very involved in the distilling process. That's something that I had to do on my own.
Gotcha.
Because he was very much more involved with molasses distilling.
Yeah.
And the two of them, well, it's fundamentally it's the same thing. They do have a difference, which we had to, it took us about 3 years. And a wonderful book, if anyone ever gets a copy of this book, called The Complete Distiller. Backwards. And this book is really just written very well, explains the process, and we just went from there.
How old is that book?
I think it's, first of all, it was produced in New Zealand.
Oh wow.
And the reason it was produced in New Zealand is because back in 2000 to 2010, New Zealand was one of the few countries in the world that allowed distilling legally at home.
Oh wow. Okay. Nice.
Yeah, very well written. And you know, once you understand the principles of it, we just developed our own way of doing it.
So you're literally by the book.
Yeah, literally by the book.
Yeah.
And of course, the wonderful thing, as I said about Richard, is I sent him maybe after 2 months a bottle of rum and just asked his opinion, you know. And
was that nerve-wracking?
yeah, it was. And the opinion didn't come back so good, you know. because of course we were taking the cuts a little too far into the tails and maybe too early in the head. But then about 4 years later at Rumcast in London, I asked him to taste my white rum, which he thinks is crazy to me to produce white rum. I should only be barreling all my rum.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, I explained to him, I said, it's the sort of product that I have right away.
Yeah.
And I treat it like an ambassador. This is the beginnings of my aged rum. What do you think about it?
Yeah.
And most people think it has a wonderful kind of bouquet and nice palate, nice smooth finish. So they kind of start thinking, yeah, I can see in 5 years this will be a nice rum. And that's what we really wanted. We didn't sell a lot of it.
How better to be honest, right, than to start with the distillate in that way? Yeah.
That's right. So at Rumfest, I gave him a sip. And he never said anything. He just went, went up and down in his head and then walked away. I figured,
that's an improvement from the first time, right?
Yeah. So I figured, well, okay, I think I'm on my way.
But before we get too far into the rums and all of the ways that you're making it there in the sugarcane syrup, because I want to hear more about that, but just to clear it up a little bit for people. So when we look up online and we see what St. Nicholas Abbey's rums are available, you see now, as you mentioned, you have your white unaged rums, and those are both in 40 ABV and 60 ABV, so a higher strength version. And then you have now your 5-year aged versions as well, which is all distilled from you all, right? And those are also 40% and 60%. And then there's also a 15-year rum. And if you really look around and you start to see all of these other things, an 8-year, a 12-year, an 18, a 20, a 22, and even a 23. So I think you mentioned already, those are Foursquare sourced molasses rums, right? Those That's ones, right. Yeah. So the rums that are yours now that are on the market are the whites and the 5 years.
And the 8.
Oh.
Yeah, the 8 is really my absolute favorite. I can honestly tell you, it is really showcased that I am going to one day create a rum as good as Richard's 23-year-old rum. So right now I have about 400 barrels of rum between, yesterday and 12 years old. We'll be 12 years old in January of next year. So any rums that you would see that might be 15 or 18 or 20, 22, 23, they're Richard's rums.
Okay.
Now, sometimes you might see a 15 because some of the retailers would have invested in that rum and it may not have sold because of its price point overseas.
Right.
And so they might still have it at 15. So right now we only have about 6 or 7 barrels of 23-year-old rum left, and maybe about twice as much of that of what is going to be 18. Yeah, it's going to be 20-year-old rum. Yeah, because we keep the label. We don't move the label every year. We group it.
Sure.
The only time we moved it every year was the 23, and that was because I was going to sell it to a Czechoslovakian distributor who in the end decided that he couldn't get it sorted out, and I had already printed the labels.
I see. So then you're moving forward, you still have some of that Foursquare stock left, but really now that you have your own aged rums, is that where the focus is going to lie in the future for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
I mean, the only reason that I kind of focused on Foursquare rum is because I have kind of like been the babysitter of these rums for the last 15 years.
Right.
And I know Richard Foursquare's most likely has barrels of the same age, but most likely not at the quantity I have, maybe a barrel or, a half barrel. So what I'm really trying to do is to push these rums as far as I think they can go age-wise. And the 23, one day I'm expecting it to be 25, 28, and 30. So we're not that keen on selling it, but if you must have it, you can buy it.
It's there.
You can pay the price.
That's right. I wasn't going to say that, but you can pay the price.
So I want to get back to the sugarcane syrup because like I was saying, I think that's a style of rum that a lot of our listeners probably haven't experienced before. and may not even understand kind of, what the process is to get cane syrup. So I'd love to hear just kind of your process of producing it, and maybe a little bit about just any unique differences between distilling it versus molasses, as you were kind of talking about earlier.
Well, I mean, it for sure is a wonderful way of making rum, because it gives you the possibility to produce a very light rum that has a wide range of very subtle flavors. And then it's depending on how much wood you add to it, you can draw those subtleties out into the age of the rum. So none of our barrels are in any way new barrels, right? We use the exact same barrel that the rum in 2006 is in for our rums today. We don't char them. We do nothing with them. And because of the very light, delicate kind of notes to the rum, it responds well. And this is where I think this is where the 8-year-old is right now, because the 8-year-old has now moved into a time frame with this very subtle wood infusion, because it's a very old barrel and it's not in any way kind of amplified.
Right.
The 8-year-old is now getting into itself and with these wonderful, very subtle notes, and still with a very delicate background. And because we had, I'll get back to the whole process, but because we had high ester rums, particularly in the early days, very high ester.
Oh, really?
The problems with cloudiness, particularly cooler temperatures, requires chill filtering.
Right.
So we've only just stopped chill filtering our 5 and 8-year-old. So right now, from this year on, our rums are not chill filtered, but we did have to do it in the early days because of the high ester aspect. So in terms of the process, we obviously start with sugarcane, which is hand cut, about 15 tons a week. And we crush the cane in our mill, which is put through the mill only once, mainly because of the labor aspect. And also cane does have a little bit like a rind to it, and this mill is really crushing it. So the process then would be, once the cane is crushed and it's the juice is sent to an evaporator that reduces it down to syrup. So the evaporation process is really reducing the juice by to a third, removing 2/3 of the water.
And so is this done by heating it?
Correct. By steam.
Okay, so steam heated.
But in a vacuum, so it's boiling about 60 degrees Celsius or less. That is then transferred to a big stainless steel tank where we store it for anywhere up to about 3 years. And then that is what we use for our fermentation.
Yeah.
Once we've got the syrup to a point where we can then reconstitute it back to juice, and then that is used in the fermentation process.
How do you reconstitute it back into juice?
We just add back water to it.
Okay, so it's like thinning the syrup out. Okay.
Yeah. So when juice is produced there, because of the high density, it reduces bacterial growth in at the cell level. And because we're pasteurizing it, we now have a fairly sanitized product. So what happens is we're able to then reconstitute it in a very sanitary way. And the benefit of that is that we are able to then control everything, fermentation right through to distillation. And that's where the strength of a small distillery comes in, because we can intimately control these processes to a level that a big distillery can't do. For instance, our sanitation of our fermentation would be far beyond a lot of the big distilleries, because some of them are using wood, and that's fine. I mean, that's fine. But what we're trying to do is to have that light, delicate rum that really has its unique flavors from the yeast for fermentation.
I wanted to circle back. You mentioned just a few minutes ago that you were doing high ester rum production several years back. Are you still doing high ester production, or how has that evolved?
That's a very good question again too, because what I meant by that is, in the process of the first 3 years, we had to decide on how much cuts we were going to take into the tails of the rum. And the rum that we produced in those days, we were taking much deeper cuts in the tails.
Yeah.
So we were getting higher esters in the rum.
Gotcha.
Then we have scaled back as we grew and understood what we were doing, so that the 8-year-old rum and the 5s now represent that lovely balance between the esters and the flavor profile that you get. Some of the 12-year-old rum, from my perspective, I'm being very, very honest.
And this is your rum that's 12 years old, but that hasn't been released yet, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, we have one barrel which we found that was, what happened is during the initial processes, the initial distillation, we would almost be distilling, aging, and taking the rum out after 4 years, 5 years. So we missed one barrel, and we found that barrel end of last year.
That's a nice surprise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we bottled it, and it's really one distributor said it's a UFO because, you know, the range in higher alcohols was like 6 times what our 5-year-old would be now. So that's what I meant about the high ester rum. Our rums would still, in relative terms, be classified as high ester rums in comparison to, you know, distillers that are using column stills, industrial column stills, and pot stills for blending. Because one of the things that puts us aside from all the other distilleries is we do not blend anything. We don't do any blending whatsoever. Okay. The only thing that we will do is dilute the rum with distilled RO water.
So then every bottle of aged rum, each one comes from one barrel then?
Yeah. And you'll get different, very slightly different flavors.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of it, you know, depending on the wood.
To quickly go through, we talked about how you get the syrup. So how long is your typical fermentation? And then I don't think we've covered just sort of, you know, what your still setup looks like there. So I'd love to quickly hear about that before we continue.
So the still is Arnold Holstein, a German still, and it produces effectively from one batch. It produces 1 barrel of rum at 65%, you know. So what it is it's the pot still, and then it's attached to a rectifying column, which is linear. So it only takes the alcohol off the top of it, not on ports on the side. And it has 9 plates. Part of the experimentation to get the right flavors, the right cuts in the tails and the heads, was a combination of time versus quality, you know? So we realized that if you try to move it along too fast, your quality diminishes. So that's where we found that nice balance. And effectively, the still is allowing the master distiller to actually, well, you could say in some respects, blend the rum on the still. What comes off the still is a series of decisions that have been made, but we place much more emphasis on fermentation than we do on distilling. Because, you know, when you become, you understand the still, it's like clockwork in many ways. But getting the fermentation right is very, very much more difficult. And that's where we put a lot of our attention, is in the fermentation. So one of the benefits of using syrup is that we are able to push our sugar wine to, you know, up to 16 degrees, 16% alcohol, whereas molasses might be more like 7 to 9, you know? So we are able to keep the yeast alive in a very much benign environment, temperature, pH. And those are the things that we really spent a lot of time on.
Did you do a lot of experimentation with different yeasts, different amounts of time and things like that before you settled on something?
Well, I have to tell you, Richard had introduced us to a yeast. I think the strain comes from South Africa, and he was using it at the time. And we would naturally, you know, ask him for the yeast. And it worked out absolutely perfect, because when he ran out of yeast one time, he had to get it sourced from somewhere else. And we realized right away that that,
It was
you
different.
know,
Yeah.
we had actually the correct yeast in the beginning, you know. It was really an important, that whole process of getting the fermentation right. It was the key to what our rums are today, you know. We have endless notes going back on like books. Because
Oh, really?
every fermentation we do and every distillation we do, we take notes, every single one. So what we can do is we can almost look back in time to see where we made that decision that has transformed the end product that we have today.
I'm imagining like a big leather-bound ledger type thing, like very, very impressive looking.
No, nothing like that. It's more like a lab book.
That sounds cool too.
Does it have a nice cloth bookmark, velvety?
Yeah, that's what it kind of looks like.
Okay. Well, yeah, that looks very scientific, very orderly.
It does.
Very cool.
So, Larry, you mentioned a couple of ways that St. Nicholas Abbey is different in its rum making already than a lot of the other Barbados distilleries, which is its sugarcane syrup, and it's all single cask. But I think there's another way also that you're different. And now I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on the topography of Barbados, never having been there, but I understand that you all are located in the Highlands. Yes. And so that microclimate, I expect, would be somewhat different than some of the other distilleries. And I just wanted to see if you could speak a little bit to how much of a role that plays. And, does aging there make it a different finished product and make it different from the other well-known Barbados rums?
Yeah, well, I think Richard's rums that were aged here speak for themselves because, for one thing, we aged the rum at a very low alcohol strength. So he might have been aging his rums at
So you're going in the barrel? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we were aging them at 43.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah. And the reason for that is in the early days, unknown to us, we just made that decision. That whole theme, of taking the rum from the barrel and doing nothing to it.
Right.
Or minimum.
You didn't want to add water after you took it out.
Yeah, exactly. So we figured in the early days, we just take the rum out of the barrel and put it in the bottle, and that's why we wanted it at 43%. But it has proven now to be really, really advantageous because with the higher amount of water content and lower alcohol strength in the barrel, the solvent, the alcohol as a solvent, is leaching the wood at a very much lower rate than it would at a high alcohol strength. Mm-hmm. So this is why I think his 23-year-old rum is still very palatable and really, really nice. Because remember, we're doing nothing to it. It's the barrel giving us what it is. It's not like recently I have tasted some blended rums and they're just so amazing how smooth and tame they are, and then you almost like it's been like not manufactured, but it's been designed, I think is the word I should use. Mm-hmm. Whereas the aging process is doing it on its own and you're reaping the benefits of it, But the Highland position is good because we would have an average of maybe 2 to 3 degrees cooler than St. Philip or even here in St. Lucie. Mm-hmm. Recently, I had one of the other distillers mention that they were having a loss of about 10 or 11%. But our loss here is almost exactly 6%. So
wow, that's a big difference.
It's much lower.
That's huge. Yeah.
Yeah, much lower. And of course, in Scotland, it's going to be like 2%.
Right.
Yeah.
It makes a big difference because, it's not just temperature, it's your humidity. Mm-hmm. And that's all part of the Highland location here. I mean, most days in December and October, we can get fog here.
Oh, really?
And the whole plantation is covered in fog.
Adds a kind of cinematic quality to it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just really high, low-lying clouds coming through.
Yeah. From what I'm hearing from your description of the aging process, it sounds like you're taking a lot of steps to really... it sounds like you don't want the wood to overly influence the spirit. And I wanted to circle back. I think you mentioned that you're using all the same type of casks. You mentioned one earlier that had been used quite a bit. Are you reusing most of your casks? And what are they when a new cask to you? And I don't mean new wood, just a one that hasn't been used by you yet. What kind of barrels are those?
Well, we would have started off with barrels from Tennessee and bourbon barrels. And,
Right down the road from me.
Yeah, right. Okay. And some of our barrels are still stamped at the back Jack Daniels. We no longer actually buying new barrels. I mean, buy barrels, because our turnover is equal to our production, and then you have to factor in loss.
Yeah.
So I don't think we've actually purchased new barrels for some time now, like maybe 4 years. It's a constant battle up here in the salty atmosphere,
right?
That where we are, to keep the barrels, the hoops and everything properly from deteriorating. It's really the same barrels that we would have had from 2006, right? And occasionally a top up in between from Richard.
It seems like you've got everything very meticulously planned out and kind of almost equalized in a nice way.
Yeah, once I saw that notebook, meticulous was the word that came to mind for me.
Well, again,
maybe.
This is the lesson that we learned, and I mentioned it earlier, is that the fact that you are small has great benefits, and you should take advantage of those benefits. So when you do a rum experience with me, I try to explain to everyone that the consumer is extremely important to us, and we cannot let the consumer down. It's like when I was a boy growing up and I had a toy or something and it was made so wonderful. I can remember years later when I had, saw the toy again, it was no longer made of metal, but it was plastic. And and you get that sense of, oh my Lord,
Those are the toys that I grew up with.
Yeah,
plastic ones.
Yeah, but the manufacturer is taking the lucrative route.
Right.
So what we say is, we're not selling more rum than we can manufacture the way we manufacture, because if we go away from that, then we're just jumping into the competitive nature of more. Whereas here we're just trying to do it, hand bottle everything, crush our canes with the amount of cane that we can handle, ferment it, distill it, barrel it, and bottle it and package it. You know.
That's the reason why I haven't been able to get my hands on a bottle yet, Larry.
Well,
I'll have to come to Barbados.
Yes. So the United States is really difficult because, there's so many regulations related to the legacy of prohibition.
You have a different distributor for every state.
Yeah. And then the problem is, again, we're such a small producer.
Right.
So it's very difficult to do it. We right now have our major export market is London and France. We have a distributor in France now who is actually exceeding the London export. But we're only still talking about 96% of our rum still being sold here at the plantation. Wow. So it's a small percentage, really.
Yeah. You mentioned a little bit of the history of St. Nicholas Abbey when we started the conversation, and I've been wanting to get back to it because I did read through some of your website, and there's a page that talks about the history of the distillery there. I'm sure you're familiar with it, and some of the previous owners. And the first sentence of that page reads, St. Nicholas Abbey's 350-year history is filled with colorful tales of murder, love, and intrigue.
Yes. Yeah.
That was not the first line I expected to read about an abbey. And it took me by surprise there.
So in the early days, the two partners were like real estate agents out of Spikestown. And one of them, Berenger, his wife, Margaret, was really beautiful woman. And we think that St. Nicholas was built the way it was built just because of her disposition, that she wanted a beautiful home. Mm-hmm. But while Berenger was in England, getting the plans and doing everything, she picked up with the partner. And then the two of them conspired to poisoned him and took the plantation and
Ouch.
his wife.
It sounds like a novel for sure. But I just wanted to, kind of ask you, how much of that history have you really kind of delved into, and how much of that tradition have you incorporated into the Abbey still today?
Well, yeah, it comes back to our what we stamp on every one of our bottles, quality and tradition, and that there really says what we do. I think, you take the history of St. Nicholas, you take the desire to see it preserved, and you add the sustainability of rum with the legacy of the history of rum in Barbados and St. Nicholas, because after all, it would have made rum. And you put that together in a way that give confidence to the consumer that this is not a gimmick,
Mm-hmm.
And where that comes back to? It comes back to a visitor who may have come here in 2008, and then he returns in 2022. And he says, you're doing it the same way that you did it back in 2008, And you haven't cut corners, you haven't changed it, you haven't started blending so you can now start adding alcohol and creating different flavors.
Yeah.
And we don't experiment with our wood at all. We like the idea that we have a ground base of good, American white oak, very mature barrels.
Yeah.
And we prefer to try and make sure that the rum that goes in it is the best quality possible from our perspective.
So you're not experimenting with a bunch of, used wine casks and things like that over at St. Nicholas Abbey?
Yeah, no. And we do that again because my perception of that is it has been successful for Foursquare and now Mount Gay is getting involved in it. But my perception from our perspective is that is right for us, being such a small, intimate distillery. Right. That is the key to someone saying, they're now trying to get a little bit more market share and do this. And so I see it as a negative. I'm sure if Richard or Raquel is listening here, they would be laughing. But remember, their volumes are so much larger.
The scale of their operation, exactly.
Yeah, they have to do that to sustain a quality product.
How much do you know about rum production historically at St. Nicholas Abbey? Do you have much information on things like how much rum was made there, what it was like, production methods, anything like that? Yeah,
well, I think, one of the things that I have fallen down on over the past few years is there's such a huge amount of information on St. Nicholas. I mean, more so than nearly any plantation in the island, that there is still a lot to be discovered. We have a national archive that fortunately was moved out of Bridgetown in the very early days. So when the fires of the city did not destroy a lot of the records, which is unusual because a lot of the records were kept in the cities. Mm-hmm. So it was moved out. And I'm just hoping for the day when they digitize it and now you can go and just search at Nicholas Abbey and it will search millions of records. But what we do know is there was a record of, and I'm not sure, I doubt they would have been talking about liters. The quantity seems large, but they did speak about in some of the handwritten notes I have here, which I haven't fully even gone through because we have mountains of books here of a record of 8,000 gallons of rum produced. But that seems to me to be large, and I'm not sure that's correct. Maybe like 800 gallons, But, Mount Gay has been able to stamp a particular point in time that their valuation showed that they had stills and rum producing products. But equally, I'm sure time will tell if the archives are properly searched. You'll find other plantations would have been producing rum too.
You alluded to this earlier, but along with Mount Gay and Foursquare, you recently created a producer group called Genuine Barbados Rum Incorporated and applied for a geographical indicator, a GI, for Barbados Rum. And I was interested, just, there was a big announcement, press release came out of, rum enthusiasts. I think most people are aware of it, and, it generated a lot of interest and kind of the ongoing development of the GI, which we've talked to Richard about on the podcast as well. But I was curious, what have you learned through the process of creating and pursuing the GI, and what do you think the next steps will look like now that you've applied for that?
Well, there is still a lot of uncertainty, you know. One of the things that I've determined, and I can now tell you, is most of the government people who are involved in this GI, whether because they've come into it new or they haven't, don't know anything about the rum industry. I mean, they really, we constantly try to explain to them that you can be a rum producing country and produce millions of gallons of alcohol like St. Croix and Diageo in Puerto Rico, or you can be, the home of rum Barbados and not produce millions of gallons, but produce top quality premium rum, because that assures you that you will always be champagne and not Prosecco,
right?
So, the point I'm making is that the pressures of the industry will always gravitate to the quality of the product. And this is where the Rum GI comes. So I'm hesitant to say that it's a done deal, but I don't think it's a done deal.
Right.
I think a lot of the people in government have this view that if we export millions of gallons of rum, we are going to be a successful rum producer. But I always say
it's just about volume.
Yeah, just volume. So St. Nicholas Abbey is an extremely good example of this, and no one really ever mentions. And I plan to do a reply to Export Barbados, which shows a graph of the rum producers, West Indies Rum Distillery, Mount Gay, St. Nicholas Abbey, and Foursquare. And of course, West Indies Rum Distillery is way up in the air producing, and Foursquare and Mount Gay are fighting here, in the middle bottom. And of course, St. Nicholas Abbey is nowhere on the chart.
Right.
Yeah.
If you were to even zoom in, you couldn't even find it.
You'd have to pull out your magnifying glass.
That's right. But if you were now to do another chart, and that chart was to say, what is the most expensive rum produced and exported in Barbados? St. Nicholas Abbey would be at the top of the list. And that's all because we are trying to promote quality, not quantity. So what the government people who are going to be making these decisions about the GI, moving it to the next level, getting it, approved, and what they understand is that this is an instrument for uplifting Barbados rum and making it a quality product, not to just be pushing out bulk rum,
How then would a next step be for the government to have a conversation with you about this? Or do they just take the proposal and kind of look at it and say yes or no? Or is there kind of an ongoing time to make your case for it?
Well, it's like any patent that you're going to Richard is very much more involved in it, but it's been submitted, and now it has to go through the process of, checking it, if the claims are authentic and whether, it can be approved. And then, of course, that's just the beginning.
Yeah.
Then you have to take it to the European and to external sources to get them to validate it.
Exactly.
And this is the point that we made. There's no sense taking rubbish to the European Union. And when they look at it, you have everything in it in the kitchen sink, every possible. It has to be reasonable and sensible, Yeah. So where we are right now is we've submitted it to the patent office, if you want to call it, and we're waiting for it to make its way through the process. But this recent ad in the newspaper from Export Barbados shows that they have not got a clue what they're talking about. Absolutely do not understand it.
I saw the article, and it did seem to be kind of a bit of forceful pushback on the application.
Yeah. And we must stress this here. We want it to be inclusive. I've just said earlier on that we welcome more distilleries coming to the island, and they come into an environment where they see we are trying to do something the right way, and they're going to benefit from it because they're going to be adding value to what they're producing because they are working within this environment. But this notion that you could age the rum overseas, bottle it overseas, blend it overseas, and still have that stamp quality Barbados rum, when we are growing the sugarcane, grinding it, fermenting it, distilling it, aging it, and bottling it in Barbados. So how does that doesn't seem to me to, and Mount Gay is just invested. Listen, I have to say this here. Mount Gay is a superb example of a foreign company coming in, investing, and doing it the right way. Superb. That's what we need more of, you know?
Yeah, we had an opportunity to talk with Jackie Brooms, who's in charge of agriculture over there, and Maggie Campbell as well, who's newer. But just hearing about all they're doing in terms of the agricultural investments and everything was super interesting. And yeah, like you said, good to see, because sometimes, you know, when a large outside company, you know, acquires a distillery, that doesn't always happen. Not just in Barbados, but like anywhere, you know, in the world of spirits, you just don't always see that. So it is encouraging.
Well, it's I think it's because also the owners of Mount Gay, they are a family, and they understand that the whole context of making decisions, having value in what you've purchased and trying to build on that value. So, you know, now Mount Gay, within the competitive environment, can claim they have a plantation, they have a sugar factory, they're producing their molasses, maybe not all of it.
Yeah.
But they're bottling it here in Barbados, except for maybe a very small amount, less than 5%. I think it's of the small bottles they do in France. Right. You know, they do small sample bottles. And then you couple that with the legacy of Richard Seale and his family as, you know, merchants in Roebuck Street, and their growth of their blending their rum, to then taking the big step as a family, Barbadian family, and investing in Foursquare, and then making a superb rum, becoming a world-renowned distiller. Why would these distillers not have a GI? Why? I mean, you know, this is such a great example of an industry that's very much home to Barbados.
Well, yeah, I know everyone will be kind of watching to see what happens. And yeah, it's going to be really interesting, as you said, with more distilleries coming into Barbados. Lots of other countries, we're starting to see more and more new rum distilleries pop up, but it's not always in a place that has a long rum making heritage. So seeing that happen in a place like Barbados is really cool. And I know we'll certainly be keeping an eye out for what's coming down the pike from those new producers as well. But yeah, with all that said, thanks so much for taking the time to take us through. We do have one last tradition here on the Rumcast. It's a bonus round of questions that we call the rapid fire round. These are questions from the imagination of my co-host John. Normally I take a look at them before we get on. I haven't seen these yet, so you know,
this could go one of many directions. That's right.
I can't vouch for them in advance, but if you're up for it, we will transition to that portion of the show now.
I'll try.
All right. Sounds good. So yeah, we're going to go through these as quickly as possible and try to get to as many as we can here within the time limit. Will be the timekeeper, and he'll let us know when we are done.
Yeah, I've got 60 seconds on the clock, and go.
Okay, we'll start out with neat or on the rocks. What's your preference?
Neat.
Okay, column, pot, or blend?
Well, I would have to say hybrid.
Okay.
Appropriate answer.
That makes sense. Molasses or cane juice or cane syrup?
Yeah, I think molasses, you know.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, because cane juice comes with a lot of inconsistencies that you really have to respect the French for what they do.
Makes sense. I get that. And you've seen firsthand now that it's difficult, right?
Yeah, it is.
Aged or unaged?
Equal, because
Good
our white rum, I love it. You know?
I hope to get a taste of it at some point soon. Okay, are there any monks or nuns still hanging around at the Abbey at this point? And if so, do they drink rum?
No, there's none, but I think that Colonel Cave is still here because he seems to be looking over my shoulder all the time.
Ah, the ghost of Colonel Cave. Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. As an architect yourself, do you have a favorite building of all time? It can be anywhere in the world.
Well, I guess the Louvre Museum in Paris.
Yes.
And the Tuileries, which was now no longer existed, but it was across the front of the Champs-Élysées view.
Yeah. We just learned about that on a trip we took recently in March. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I have no idea if you know of the show or have ever heard of the show Downton Abbey, but
yes.
if you have, which of your rums would you serve the characters of Downton Abbey?
Well, I would say I would go with the 23-year-old. I think it kind of conjures up this dark rum more so than my 8-year-old, which is very light and golden.
That's for the upstairs characters, right? For the downstairs characters, we'd have to think of something, maybe the white or something different, but I'm sure they would all enjoy it.
Yeah, sorry, we could call it like a new gin and tonic, but not with gin.
Right, a rum and tonic it is. All right, how old does a rum from St. Nicholas have to be for us to call it Old St. Nick?
I would say anywhere from 5 up.
Okay.
That's time.
All right. We got through almost all of them there. That was great. The only one I didn't get to, which I think I should still have you answer, Will, if you'll allow me.
All right, I'll allow it.
Other than the amazing rum you were producing and many others, why should people come visit Barbados and St. Nicholas Abbey?
Well, it's really simple. Barbados, the one thing Barbados has is really friendly, well-educated people. And that makes a big difference, because I had a client and he had a home in Bermuda. And when I went and saw how beautiful Bermuda was, I said to him, why did you come to Barbados? And that was his answer.
For the company.
Yeah.
Friendly and well-educated people.
I as an American, I resemble that remark.
Yeah, we travel overseas to find the well-educated people now.
We certainly do.
Well, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks again, Larry, for coming on. It was great to learn more about what you're doing down there. And I know everyone will probably listen to this and I think be both excited by what you're doing because of the small scale and how committed you are to doing things your way. I think there will be a little bit of sadness from our American listeners who probably their prospects of getting St. Nicholas Abbey rum here in the States, they may feel as dwindling now after listening to the interview.
Unfortunately. But
all the more reason to come visit, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We can be disappointed in that, but we have to respect the process and results.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I think that will make the visit all the more worth it. So appreciate you again for coming on the show, and thank you again.
Thank you for having me, and you keep up the good work, because this is really important that you're doing this and exposing people to different types of rums in general,
Excellent. Well,
awesome.
we appreciate the kind words, and we'll keep doing what we do as long as you keep doing what you do.
Okay. We'll
Deal.
look forward to seeing you soon. All right.
Yeah.
Great.
All right, everyone. Thanks again for listening to another episode of the Rumcast. If you want to learn more about St. Nicholas Abbey, we have included a link to their website in the show notes. There's lots of information about all kinds of details we didn't get into during the episode, so would encourage you to go and check that out. Lots of info there. If you have any questions for John or myself, we always love to hear from listeners, just as we answered Alex's question at the top of this show. So feel free to send us an email, host@rumcast.com. That's HOST@rumcast.com. Or, as Alex did, you can reach us on social media. John, how can they find us on social media?
You can find us at the Rumcast on many platforms, social media-wise. You can find us at the Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Did I say the Instagram?
The Instagram.
It's supposed to be Instagram, right? Wasn't that the whole point in the movie, the one about Facebook? It's not the Facebook, it's Facebook.
Well, yeah, when it started, Facebook was the Facebook.
Right, that's what I'm saying. And
Yeah, they took it
somehow
off.
regressed it to the Instagram right now.
Right, yeah.
So it's Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, not the YouTube, and Twitter. So you can find us on any one of those platforms at the Rumcast. Funny enough, maybe it should just be at Rumcast. Will
we talked a lot about that in the early days. Our website
missed an opportunity.
Our website is just rumcast.com.
Yeah,
so, you know.
Well, we are the Rumcast after all, and I'm okay with saying that. The definite article is certainly a valuable one. So yeah, find us there. Hit us up. Let us know what you're interested in, whether or not we should call it the Rumcast or Rumcast, or if you have any other opinions on any of the rums we discussed here today, either during our intro or with St. Nicholas Abbey. Want to tell us how some of those that you've had have tasted and your experience with them. We'd love to hear about it. So as always, thank you so much for listening. We appreciate it. Definitely look for us on Patreon. Will, anything else?
Yeah, no, just as I said in the intro, we just released a bonus episode for our patrons all about the latest Transcontinental Rum line releases. So if you are excited about those and want to learn more, go to patreon.com/therumcast and all kinds of good stuff there. Bonus episodes. We do happy hours once a month for our patrons that are really, really fun. Really look forward to those. That's a highlight of the month, every month for me for sure. So,
Oh yeah.
Anyway, John, until next time, I'll talk to you.
All right.